Good afternoon. My name is Leon Dancona. And I would like to show you today the first two of 4 items on the Craig Proctor version of reality. And they are filters and graphs. And in the next seminar, you'll be notified we will cover the other 2, performance and turnover. Filters are the very basis on which you should be presenting information to your clients. And I am joined today by Karen Gozon, and she is going to show you how filters work.
Okay, so before we get started with filters and graphs, first we're going to give you a brief introduction as to how to learn more about reality, your Craig Proctor edition of reality. So when you log into reality, you're going to notice, okay, there is a learn about in each menu, and within each function in the menu, there is a question mark that allows you to learn more about the menu item. So I'm going to switch to reality, and I'm going to show you exactly how that works and where you can find that. So you should be able to see my screen here. And as an example, I have the Orange County, California database. And as I was referring to earlier, if you were to click on a menu item, so for example, if we click on graphs, you'll notice the first option underneath is a Learn About Graphs option. When you click on this menu item or this option, it will give you a brief help file that tells you what that menu item does. To close this help file, you simply click on the X at the top right or click anywhere else on the screen. So you'll notice each one of these menu items has the same Learn About help file. Now, beside each of these functions, you'll notice there's a small question mark beside them, and if you hover over it, it tells you that it's a help file. So if we were to click on the question mark beside average days on market, you'll notice it gives you a help file that tells you 2 things: what it does and how to use it. Again, to close the help file, you simply click on the X at the top right, or you may click anywhere else on the screen and it will close the help file for you.
And now it's back to Leon Dancona, and we're talking about filters. It's back to Leon Dancona, and we're talking about filters. And I should point out that because different MLSs have different input fields, and no 2 MLSs are the same, what we've done is we've organized them in such a manner that up until the red line, all MLSs will give you bath, bedrooms, district, county, city, and zip. And if you're in Canada, it'll give you an FSA. So, you know, one of the things that we preach is location, location, location. And location, 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 we don't practice it. So let's use filters to bring it down to a level. If I give you the average price in Orange County, that doesn't do much for the homeowner who's trying to sell the house. Average price where? So bring it down to either a district or a neighborhood or something that's uniquely definable by the property that the person is trying to buy or sell. And so if a carpenter walks in with a hammer and the plumber walks in with a wrench, what does the real estate agent walk in at? You can't carry a house. So if you have an iPad, this will work on an iPad, or if you have an Android device, that will work. It generally is not a good idea to use an iPhone because it's just too small. So what we want you to do is stand out from the crowd, and by knowing more than the last 3 agents that left just before you.
So now I'm going to show you filters within the Orange County database again. Okay, so you'll notice that we have the filter by menu here, the very first menu you see at the top left of your Craig Proctor database. So just as Mr. Dancona had mentioned earlier, the first few filters you see here are standard with most MLSs, all the way up to ZIP. For our Canadian subscribers, you'll notice that ZIP is replaced by FSA, which is the forward sortation area, or the first 3 digits of your postal code.
After all, we're Canadians and we're different.
So anything beyond ZIP or FSA is now specific to each MLS. So it depends on what's available within your MLS, and that's what your filter by menu will display. So we're going to briefly go over some of the available standard filters. That way you have a good idea of what they include. So we're going to go, for example, in county. Okay, so Orange County only contains Orange County. Okay, but let me go over the headings that you see here. So the default sorting is always by units. It will always display the county or the zip code or the city with the most amount of units on top. You are able to sort the list or the chart by any column heading you prefer. So I'm going to go into city as an example to give us more to play with. So you'll notice here at the top right, it says 50 entries, meaning there are 50 cities that comprise the Orange County database. So now it's sorting it by alphabetical order by the name of the city. If we were to click on units, it will sort it in descending order by unit, so highest to lowest. Click on it again and it will sort the other way, lowest to highest, so ascending order. You can do this for every column you see within this table. So again, if I were to click on value, it will sort from highest to lowest. And you'll notice that the cities on the left change according to what you select for sorting. You'll notice as well that beside the column headings, there is a small question mark. Again, it will display a help file. So this is useful to you if you wanted to learn more about what each of these column headings represent. So we have units sold, total value of homes sold, average days on market, average sale price, median sale, average sold to ask ratio, and at 100%. So you'll see here within the help file a description as well as an example of the differences between average sale price and median sale price. So we're going to close this help file and go back to the filter by menu. So we're going to take a look at zip code this time. And you'll notice at the top right, it's telling us there are 112 entries, meaning 112 zip codes that comprise the Orange County database. And again, you have the same column headings. So if you forget what they mean, the small question mark at the top right will again provide you with the help file. Also noteworthy is the span that you see at the top right, which defaults to 12 months. Note that you can change this to display only the current year, the last 13 months, last month, and so on. Watch as I change the span to last 2 months. You'll notice that the numbers or the figures display change. And if I were to switch it back to 12 months, you'll notice they increase. So the span drop-down menu does have an effect on the figures that you see within your chart.
Now, filters and graphs are like love and marriage, and they go together like a horse and carriage. And if you remember that song, you're an old person like me. Filters can make you a real estate agent of choice because you know your stuff. Pick a city, break it down by zip code, and then break it down by type of homes, and you can keep on adding filters. But I really advise that you never shoot from the hip, and always know what the graph will look like before you actually produce the graph, because it may surprise you, and you may be spending a half an hour trying to get the listing and the other half an hour buying it back. So be careful what you're doing. Now, I'd like to add a word of caution. My professor used to say that you need to have a statistical sampling. You can't tell if the coffee is good or bad by checking out one bean. I've tried this myself. It takes about 200 beans to make a decent cup of coffee, which I do every day, a couple of times. And you should try and grind the coffee first. But at any rate, the same is true of real estate. If you pick a small little city, for example, Angels Camp, you notice there were 6 solds there. You can hardly get a graph that makes any sense. Generally speaking, I like to work with at least a minimum of 100, but better about 250 input units to produce a graph. And so when I take Angels Camp and translate it into a zip code, then as you notice, this gives us some good variables, tells us what the market is doing, and so on. It also makes you really, really knowledgeable. For example, here in our average price graph, we also have a return on investment, ROI. In this case, if you bought a home in December of 2011 and sold it in November of 2012, you'd be up by 7% on average, and that's pretty good, considering the Bank in Canada pays about 0.5% interest. And so here is somebody that we used the zip code and we used a subtype condominium, and we decided we wanted 4 bedrooms. All of this is very nice, but you got to remember only 7 condos like this sold the whole year. So I wouldn't bet my firstborn on this. It depends what each one of these condos were and where they were located and so on. It's hardly enough to present to a buyer or a seller that if he bought this type of property, it would go up by almost 50%. I wouldn't go that far. And in this graph shows a 5-year time span and shows a decline of 27.5%. Not very encouraging if you look at that. So there is time spans you can put in, because the next graph that you're going to see is a 4-year graph, and it actually went up by 27%. So before you decide what you're going to show a client, make sure that you've researched just a little. And reality makes it really interesting to do. It's very, very fast. It shouldn't take you more than 4 minutes. When you get a call and come and see, I would like to sell my home, so you get onto reality, and in 5 minutes you have printed and done all the graphs that you need.
Okay, so just as Mr. Dancona was pointing out earlier, use the options that are available in reality to your benefit. You may want to try changing the span. You may opt to show or hide the return on investment. You may opt to show average versus median prices, and so on. So these are the available options for your graph in reality. So you'll notice we are able to change chart options and all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to reality so that I can show you where you can find that. So we're back in Orange County. We're going to go to one of our graphs. In this case, we're going to take a look at average price. So the default for your graphs in reality as well as your charts is always a span of 12 months, which you find here at the top right corner. So here are all of our available options. We're just going to quickly take a look at them and how they affect the graph. So notice here I could change this to just the current year, 13 months. And for our Orange County database, we can even go as far back as 8 years. If you wanted to do a 2-year graph, for example, okay, so you'll notice our return on investment is an increase of 15%. So that means, as Mr. Dancona was saying, that if you had bought the house in January of 2011 and sold it here in December of 2012, you would have made a profit of 15.9%. Now, how does 2012 compare to 2011? So I'm going to do a 2-year overlap. Okay, so you can see that the red line represents this year, which is 2012, and the blue line is last year, which is 2011. So you'll notice that between the months of June to December, we see an increase. So in terms of December, we see an increase here at the bottom of 22.97% over last year. And in terms of average price, you see that above here, it's 610 in 2012 compared to 496 in 2011.
I'd like to point out that the 22% is considerably higher than Case-Shiller or other things. I mean, Orange County and real estate generally in the United States is really, really hot, much hotter than the press is reporting. We have our own reality index, and if you want to be privy to that, you can call Karen at 416-785-4321, extension 200, and she'll send you our monthly reality index, which is really, really interesting because we've been dealing with so much bad news now that most economists will say that the U.S. economy will recover through housing as it declined by the housing market.
So I'm going to switch this back to 12 months worth of data, and then we're going to just quickly go over some of the available options at the top. So you can choose to show the return on investment or hide it. You can choose to show average sale prices over median prices. You can also change the color of your graph. So if I wanted it in blue, I could do that, as well as the size. So you could go into full screen, large, medium, or small. Currently, I have the medium size selected. There are also a number of available graph options or chart options you see at the top left. So if I were to, let's say I wanted a graph, but I did not want to specifically show the amounts on each point, I could just select line, and you'll notice it simply displays the line graph without the specific values. One thing I do want to point out is that if you change your chart options today or at this very moment and I decide to hide the ROI and change to median, remember that reality remembers your preferences. So the next time you log in, it's going to give you the exact same preferences. And that's noteworthy as well because we've received a number of phone calls where a user didn't realize that it saved the preferences, and so they think that reality isn't working, but in fact it's the opposite. Reality is working perfectly the way it is. You just need to remember to switch it back to what you would like to see. So just to show a few more examples, we have a spline graph, and then we also have a bar line graph. Okay, so those are the available options you see in reality. At this moment, what we'd like to do is to open the floor for anyone who might have any questions. By the way, just a reminder, after the webinar today, what we're going to do is upload a copy of the recording. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to make it available in your reality program when you log in, just like the performance and turnover video. So as we do more of these webinars, we're going to keep uploading the videos for you to see. We also have them on YouTube, and for anyone that needs a copy of that, if I don't send you a link to it, please feel free to email me at karen@realestatestatistics.com, or you may also call me at 416-785-4321, extension 200, and I'd be happy to send you a copy. So how do you ask a question? I'm just going to provide you directions. So you'll notice on my screen right now there are instructions. So if you have a question, you simply raise your hand from your GoToWebinar panel, and what we're going to do is provide you the opportunity to speak. Okay, so I believe we have one. We have Vic on the line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute Vic so Vic can ask us his question. Okay, so Vic, you actually had asked, you had enter the question via our chat line asking how many properties sold in the last 2 years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to reality, and again I have Orange County here as an example. Now that might not be the exact same database you have access to, but if you were to go into graphs, units sold, and change the span into 2 years, okay, you'll notice here at the top left, it actually gives you the total units sold within the last 2 years. So if you wanted to find out, well, what's the total amount of units sold for the last 5 years, you simply change your span again. And always take a look at the top left. So for 5 years, for all of Orange County, California, you have 138,189 units sold. And it will give you a chart at the bottom of the graph that tells you the exact amount of units that sold for each month for the last 5 years, the total amount of units sold, average, highs, and lows. And if you wanted to compare it in terms of percent increase or decrease from year to year, you will see that in a second chart at the bottom of the graph. Okay, so if anyone else has any questions, please raise your hand and we'll give you the opportunity to ask your question.
Doran asked what absorption rate is. Absorption rate is a definition of how many units got absorbed after they were put on the MLS. For example, if you had 10,000 listings and 1,000 sold, then the absorption rate would be 10%.
So just to keep in mind, if you were to go into the absorption rate graph within your Craig Proctor Reality program, you'll notice that there are 3 rows in the chart below. So you'll notice that for the solds, okay, Reality automatically populates the amount of units that sold from month to month for the last 12 months. Now, in the active rows, you'll notice there's a default of 1,500. Okay. Now, this one is just a sample. It doesn't necessarily mean that there were 1,500 active listings. We simply use that as the standard. Okay, and what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go to your MLS and grab the amount of actives for each month, and then you fill it in. So, for example, if I were to just quickly put in 3,000 for each month, and I'm just using this as a rough example just to show you how it works. Okay, so once you've populated your actives, you can go ahead and give it a name. Now, you might wonder why you need to do that. It's actually to your benefit, because what it ends up doing is it saves the amount of actives you've already put in. And then you can just easily pull it up next month. So I'll call this, let's say, active January to December 2012. And then I'm going to save it. And now you'll notice that it gives you your absorption rate graph. Now, let's say next month when your database is updated, you'd like to pull this up again. There is a Select Actives button at the bottom right that allows you to pull up any of your saved actives. So you simply select, click on the Select button, and it will pull up the graph for you. Or you can opt to delete it at any time. So for accuracy, we recommend that you put in the actives for roughly around the same date each month. Okay, so I hope that answers the question from Doran. I believe we have another question.
From Vic Eugene. Which graph is best to use in listings? Well, I suggest that you print them out. And as the conversation comes up, for example, if you know that the average days on market is 70 days where you are, and the nice lady wants to give you a 30-day listing, you don't want to go into a big, long hassle. You just pull out the pre-printed graph, or and I prefer if you have the graph because everybody has it. not everybody is that computer literate or that fast with computers, and say, I'd love to do it in 30 days, but last month, it took 70 days to sell, so I'm just going to make this offer for 90 days. You're not into arguments, you're just into writing. If it comes to, if the lady seems to think, or if the gentleman seems to think that they're going to get more than they ask for, it would be nice to have a sold-to-ask ratio, which shows you that the average there was 95%, and rather than set them up for a big disappointment, you might just show them that graph. So use your judgment, have at least 4 graphs, the first 4 ready, so you can do what you need to do.
Okay, so our next participant that has a question is Julie. So Julie actually wants to be able to ask her question. So what we're going to do is we're going to unmute Julie so she has the opportunity to ask her question. Julie?
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi. I just have a quick question. The numbers that are represented in the months here, are those properties that have been sold within that month, or are they properties that have closed that month?
That depends how your MLS reports it. About 50%, it's a very good question. About half MLSs report date closed, half MLSs report date sold. Where are you from?
Toronto. We're on the Toronto board.
Then you know that Toronto reports date sold.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in other words, if you search for solds, there's only one way you can search for the solds in January of last year, and that is by date sold.
Okay.
But if you're in a different MLS that does date closed, then that's the only way you can figure out which it is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so if anyone else has any questions, please don't hesitate. We'll give you another 3 minutes to ask your question, and then we'll close the session. By the way, I just wanted to remind you that if you would like to run Reality on your iPad, that there is an iPad app that you have to download. I know that some have tried to load Reality through their Safari on their iPad, and that will require you to install Flash. So just a reminder that we do have a Reality app specifically designed to run on the iPad, so that it doesn't require you to run Flash. Everything that you see within your desktop when you run Reality is also available within your iPad. So everything you have here, you can take on the go with you as well. Okay, so we're just going to give it a few more minutes and give people a chance to ask their questions. Okay, so Doran still is not clear about the actives in the absorption rate.
The active are the amount. You have to go to your MLS. You have to go to your MLS and figure out what the actives were at any given time. I should caution you that the absorption rate is rather tricky, because if you take January on January the 28th, and you do February on the 13th, and you do March on the 31st, you're going to get all sorts of screwy data. So actives, you have to go to your MLS and find out what the actives were. And once you put them in here, then we will have already given you the solds, and this will actually be what the absorption rate is. I hope that answers your question. If it still doesn't, how can I use this to value a home at a listing presentation? That is for the next webinar. We cover that. When is that?
We have another webinar next Wednesday at the same time at 2 p.m. I will send everyone an email that invites you to join the webinar, and that will cover Angela's question as well. Angela, you wanted examples on the turnover tab. That's to be covered in the next webinar. We actually did a webinar on the performance and turnover, which is what you were asking about, back in December. And there is a link here at the top right that allows you to watch a recording of that webinar. So we're simply repeating that webinar next Wednesday at 2 p.m. And that should answer both Eugene and Angela's questions as to how you can use this on the listing presentation, as well as more examples, or to show you exactly how the turnover tab works.
So make sure you tune in next Wednesday. We're sponsored by the Craig Proctor Seminars, and it's probably the best thing that you can do for your career. There's another question.
Okay, this one's from Angela. So her question is, why input info if you pull from our MLS?
Why input info if you pull from our MLS? I'm not clear why that is, because we do not, I understand why we pull it in. You're just going to have to live with that. I mean, we have certain limitations that we can do because many people want to get these solds for, let's say, a small area. They only do one thing or the other, and so therefore we cannot shadow the MLS on a day-to-day basis.
Also, if you're wondering why you have to put in the active into reality as opposed to us grabbing that for you, is because reality only contains sold information. We only track sold information, which is why we're able to populate anything that's sold. Remember that we deal with statistics, so we can, in order for statistics to be accurate, it has to be sold. That's the only way. Just because it's been listed doesn't mean it will sell, and so we don't keep track of that. I hope that answers your question as well. So I believe that's everything we have for today. So we're going to end this webinar. I hope you found this to be very helpful and informative. Again, we'd like to thank you for participating in the webinar today. You will receive another invitation from me by Friday at the latest, inviting you to our webinar for next Wednesday, again at 2 p.m. Eastern. And during that webinar, we'll be covering the two other menu items, which is turnover and performance. And we hope that you can join us for that webinar as well.
Have a wonderful week in sales. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.